What's up, everybody, and welcome back to TarHeelIllustrated.com, or, of course, if you are watching on our fast-growing YouTube channel, that is Tar Heel Illustrated. I'm THS staff writer Jacob Turner, and joining me for this podcast, our director of basketball recruiting, and he's an analyst for us, David Sisk. David, really excited to dive into another episode of our Scouting Report podcast that, if you haven't seen the other one we put out on GG Jackson, definitely go check this one out. Going to be focusing on another North Carolina commit in the 2023 class in this podcast, Simeon Wilcher, 6'5", 165-pound point guard out of New Jersey, 10th ranked player in the 2023 class. David, this past weekend, was at the Nike EYBL Session 3 in Louisville and got to see Simeon play for the first time. So got an interview with him as well, which you can see on our website. I'll put a link to that article below where you can go check that one out. Really, really good stuff from David on this one. Before we dive into Simeon, I want to give a shout out to our sponsor on this one, RokeShop.com. You guys have heard them. You guys know we love them. They specialize in top shelf family grown hemp products, CBD, Delta 8, Delta 9, whatever form you like it in. Trust me, they've got it. Check them out, RokeShop.com. Use that promo code TARHEELS10 to save on your order. So, David, I imagine it was a very busy weekend for you, but one of the most rewarding things about going up to events like that is getting to see guys like that for the first time, getting to see a Carolina commit in Simeon Wilcher, a guy who you've obviously covered throughout recruitment, throughout his commitment, and even before that as well. So he's a guy you've seen a lot of online, but for the first time actually getting to see him in person doesn't get much better than that. So I'm gonna start it off with this question for you, David, because I was reading your interview earlier, and one of the things that stood out in one of your top graphs when you described him as Jersey tough. And I absolutely love that comparison from going and watching some of his highlights as well, because you'll learn pretty quickly from watching him. He's an incredibly tough, aggressive, physical kid. So explain that a little bit more for us, David. What kind of player is North Carolina getting in Simeon Wilcher, and where does that Jersey tough analogy come from?
Well, let me start out by saying 165. He's not 165. He's about 185.
Put on some pounds.
Interviewed him, yeah. And one thing, when I interviewed him, and I'm just face to face, just right here, and I was like, "Man, you're jacked up." I normally wouldn't say that to maybe football players, but not basketball players that are juniors in high school getting ready to be seniors. But man, he's been in a weight room. He is really thick up in his shoulders and the top of his biceps and triceps, upper chest area. Really, really thick. You can tell he's done the work. 165 pounds, he wouldn't be able to take on what he does. But now, he can deliver a blow at 100. He's built like a safety.
Really, that's a good way to describe him, yeah.
And he, the one thing I noticed, now, it was an up and down weekend for him. It was his first weekend with Albany City Rocks. He had played, they'd started out the EYBL season with Renaissance Hoops. He switched teams. So he actually came off the bench. Not a knock on his talent, but he's the new kid on the block for that team. So he came off the bench. You could tell early on, he got more accustomed to it as it went. But it was a change for him. He had to get accustomed to his teammates. He hadn't played with them. I doubt it practiced very little with the team. And but I noticed as the week went, he got more playing time. But it was up and down. There were some situations where he struggled a little bit, and then ones where he played very well. But there was a game with Expressions Elite, I think it was. I think it was when he played against Bazelis, that he had they lost by one, but they gave up a three at the buzzer, and he actually hit a shot with about 6 or 7 seconds left to put them up either one or two. I don't remember if I think they got beat by 3. It would have put them up 2. But he scored the last 12 points of the game for Albany City. And you could tell he hit a 3, but man, it was just, late in the game, it's about getting to the rim. And that's what he did, especially from the wing. He could really get there from the wing. And the thing is, help's there when you do that. A lot of times when you come to the middle, it can be flattened out, but you've got help on either side. In that situation, you've usually got somebody in help position come across a lane. He could get there about the time the help did, they couldn't set up for the charge. And if they have to go up with him, man, he just bounces off and finishes. And he also is pretty good at the reverse. Sometimes he got around them and shot the reverse, kind of a stooping reverse shot. He's good at that. So he's got a lot of finishes. But the thing, man, I kept noticing was how hard he went in. You know, he went in, you know, with bad intentions, as hard as going to the rim as hard as he could go. So, and kept going. And that's the one thing I noticed as it got late, he wanted the ball and he wanted that contact. He wanted it to be a one-on-one situation to see who the better man was. A lot of guys will do that early. And then when a game, especially in a tight game, they'll shrink. He never shrunk from it. You know, he wanted the ball in his hands. Now, like I said, there were some games where he kind of struggled on fitting. He fouled out of his last game Sunday, the fourth game out of the 5-game set. But there was some other ones when he was very good. So he understands the big picture. So I really think he just like I said, hard-nosed, competitive Jersey City kid who's physically strong, who's competitive, and I think Carolina fans will really like what they're getting.
Definitely. I want to talk on some other aspects of his game as well that I kind of noticed from watching some of his tape and whatnot. And feel free, maybe if you didn't see this weekend, that's completely fine. I know AAU events can be a lot different than high school games at times, and how those, you know, it's just a different kind of game in a lot of ways. And you learn that kind of quickly when you go watch some of these events in person. But dynamic playmaker, he described himself, I believe in your interview, as unselfish. He's a guy that likes to get others involved. Would you agree with those kind of comparisons? And if so, did you see any of that this weekend, or was it a little bit different in terms of what you actually witnessed?
Yes, he drove to score and drove to pass, drove to facilitate. So he's definitely got the playmaking ability in it. You know, he's got his head up when he goes in. He understands passing angles really well, especially on the drive. So and when he gets to North Carolina, it's not happenstance when a player drives that his teammates are in the spot that they're in. I mean, you're usually going to have the opposite wing and the opposite corner field. He knows how they're going to field on those spots. He knows where the post is going to be. A lot of teams, if one guy drives baseline on one side and the post is in the dunker spot opposite, they'll cut to the front of the rim. So when you cut, you know, you just make the pass. You don't have to find your guy. You make the pass and trust that he's going to be there. Simeon understands angles, understands passing angles. So that's one thing I noticed. He might drive baseline and make like a 45-degree pass to the mid post or to right in front of the rim, and the guy wasn't necessarily wide open. You know, there was a couple of times I was sitting on the baseline just to the right side of the basket, and he drove on that side. It was in that Expressions game, and he had a couple of dumps to the middle of the lane. It was crowded, and I'm like, whoa, you know, that's good vision and understanding where his guy is going to be. So, you know, yeah, he's good at delivering the ball. You know, he can score, he can pass too. He can do both.
David, how right or wrong am I in comparing him to Caleb Love?
I believe we may have had this discussion. I don't know.
You and AJ probably did at some point.
We probably did, because I've been asked that same question before. I would say Caleb, better outside shooter.
Okay.
You know, he's streaky and hot. I'll be honest, Caleb might remind me of maybe to people in the North Carolina and Charlotte area who saw Rob Dillingham, just from this standpoint. It is Caleb he'll settle for that three a lot. And we saw it in the season, especially when he lost confidence in making the two. You know, we wanted to settle for that three, and he didn't get to the rim as much. And in high school, Wilcher's a lot thicker, a lot stronger up top. Much more of a lane, of a guy getting into the lane, of a guy taking on contact, of a guy much better finisher to rim, better mid-range game, a more physical player. I think a better passer in traffic but I would give Caleb Love the advantage with that perimeter shot. And I think Caleb too. Caleb can get hot and Caleb can get streaky. Here's the thing. Here's the comparison I'd make. Height-wise, pretty identical. I think Simeon maybe an inch taller, but the big thing to me would be they both like the moment. And there's one thing about Caleb Love and watching. Caleb Love was not scared to take the big shot. Caleb Love was not scared to have the ball in his hands late in the second half. Caleb wasn't afraid to have the ball in his hands late in the shot clock, and that's what I see in Wilcher. But how they attack from there is different.
Definitely. And the main reason I say that too is I from watching, I went back and kind of watched Simeon's and watched Caleb, both of their kind of high school and AAU, some tapes for there. And the biggest thing in terms, I know they both kind of like to get to the rim a lot, and they kind of like that contact down low, especially Caleb now in college, especially with the way Carolina played last year. But the biggest comparison for me looking at them was just almost kind of the attitude they play with. They both of them kind of like to go create contact down low, score on you and tell you about it, and react to it and react to the crowd and get into the game, and just kind of the attitude they play with. That seemed like something that was similar. I do agree that Wilcher to me looks like more of kind of a guy who's more willing to pass. I know Caleb can do that as well, but I consider Caleb more of a score first point guard. I don't know necessarily
here's one thing,
if what's his name is.
Caleb sometimes will pass. He likes to try to make that difficult pass. He likes to make that big play a lot.
Top 10 kind of play, yeah.
Yeah, for Wilcher's, and one thing that would happen, I think one thing Caleb has really had to try to mature his game with is if Caleb made, let's say, some kind of big-time overhand baseball pass or a no-look or something, he would come down, let's say they get a loose ball or they get out on a break, and he would he'd have his confidence up, he'd get kind of happy, and he'd really try to do that again. It'd end up being a mistake. Yeah, Wilcher's kind of more understanding in angles, so he can make that pass without really trying to make that home run play, if that makes sense as far as pass goes. I'll say one thing about him when you talk about the toughness. If you go back and look at their schedule, his schedule at Roselle Catholic, they won to Upper New Jersey, they won to private, and then New Jersey placed the champion private against the champion public. And you've got to remember, I'm trying to remember the name of the school that they beat in the private, but they had Mackenzie Mabako and they had Nas Cunningham, the number one player in 2024 on the other team. That's who they beat in the private. Then they turned around and played Camden, who had a 75-game winning streak, something like that, going in to the middle of the season. And they got beat at Hoop Hall, and but had an incredible record during the state. And they had DJ Wagner, who's the number 3 player right now in that class in 2023. And they had Aaron Bradshaw, a 7-footer, who's the second-ranked center in the 2023 class. And Roselle beat him, and he had big – so you got to look, man, some of those high school games getting down there at the end, I mean, it was like Peach Jam. But man, it was New Jersey, and there was a lot on the line. And he was the guy in big-time rough and tough situations. So like I said, he has won a lot of games against great competition on a big stage. Mm-hmm. We don't have to worry about stage fright or what happens to him when the bright lights hits him. I mean, he's ready for it.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that too, because that's the one thing he just seems like he thrives in it and enjoys it. And you can't really coach that. And guys, I think some people just have it and some people don't. But he's a guy that definitely seems to thrive in the moment. And from what we kind of saw from Caleb, another reason I threw that comparison out, he's a guy that throughout Carolina's NCAA tournament run, throughout the season, you can tell he kind of likes that spotlight and plays better, when the lights are on him. So fantastic stuff, David. Like I said earlier in the podcast, we're going to be rolling out a few more of these scouting reports on a few other Carolina targets that David saw in Louisville this past Memorial Day weekend is what I should call it, because I don't know when these will come out.
Mm-hmm. Let me say one other thing. Mm-hmm. I talked to his dad a lot, Sergio, and his dad's been great to talk to. I'd really not sit down and taken a whole lot of time with Simeon when I interviewed him before. Like I said, most of the talk's been with his dad. but he was just a very, very impressive young man. Well-spoken, obviously a hungry kid. There was no entitlement to him. I really, really liked him. And, he talked a lot about just work. And you could tell he's not taking anything for granted. He is all about putting in the work and getting back on. He knows he's far from a finished product. And he knows that there's been a lot of kids in his situation that have come before him that didn't pan out, who might have got lazy. Yeah. And he does not have that in him at all. And like I said, I can't tell you how impressed I was with him, talking to him. Very, very comfortable conversation. And like I said, he's impressive the way he plays. He's impressive the way he looks. Like I said, you get up to him, and I'm like, man, you've been camped in the weight room. But then when he talks to you, it's well thought out. It's well spoken. But it's a very level-headed conversation on his part.
Yeah, I'm glad you kind of reminded me of this. I watched a Slam magazine video that they did on him. It was like 3 or 4 months ago when it came out. And they kind of sat down and interviewed him and just talked about to him a little bit. And that's one thing that you could just kind of tell from the jump is humble, nice, very well-spoken kid. But when he gets on that basketball court, go watch some of his highlights that, he doesn't take any prisoners. And I love kids like that who can turn it off and on. When they're off the court, they're great people. When they're on the court, still great people, but they play with that attitude and that aggressiveness, and they love the just competing. And I think that's really what stands out with Simeon.
A very friendly kid, very friendly, kind of, you could tell he was people oriented, but like you say, when he gets on a court, man, that face totally changes.
He seems like a guy you'd want to play with too, teammate wise. Like he seems like a great teammate. Would you think that's accurate as well?
Yeah. And I would think so. I've not been around him enough on that. I've not talked to other teammates on that, but generally guys like that, are guys that you want to play with. So like I said, I was very impressed of him on and off the floor. I think North Carolina's got a good one.
Great stuff, David. If you guys want to see the interview that David did with Simeon, I'll put a link to that in the description below so you guys can just click on and head over to TarHeelIllustrated.com and check that one out. If you want to be a premium member too, you can sign up for just $8.33 a month. The link to that is below as well. And a quick shout out to our sponsor again, RogueShop.com. Love them to death. Check them out. Make sure you use the promo code TarHeels10 to save. And again, you can find the link to their website in the description below. I've been Jacob Turner. He's been David Sisk for another episode of the Scouting Report. We got a few more of these will be rolling out in some Carolina targets. So looking forward to continue to do these, Dave. And we definitely got a few more that we're going to have to bust out over the next few days, but they're definitely fun to do. And I know you're ready to talk about some of the guys you saw up in Louisville over Memorial Day weekend. Make sure you guys like, share, subscribe, hit that notification bell as well. And we'll see you guys in the next one. Thanks.